Happy St. Patrick's Day. Today, March 17th, is Patrick's Feast Day. It's a day to celebrate all things Irish, leprechauns and green beer and shamrocks. Now, St. Patrick is such a renowned figure that many pious legends clustered around him. Maybe you've heard the one that Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland. Well, that's not true because there were never any snakes in Ireland. That one's easy. But probably the biggest misconception about him was that he was Irish. He wasn't. He was born and raised across the channel from Ireland in Britain. And that's where the real story about him has some twists and turns. So, Patrick, born in England in the 400s, born into a wealthy, elite, noble family. He had all the privilege in front of him possible. He was also, he says, he wasn't much of a believer as a young person. And a matter of fact, as a teenager, he got into a lot of trouble. Then when he was 15 years old, something terrible happened to him. A group of Irish slave traders got on a boat, crossed the channel, went into England, went to Patrick's home, broke in, grabbed him, put a chain around his neck, and brought him over to Ireland to be a slave. They sold him into the countryside to work as a slave to be somebody's shepherd. So now try to imagine what this would be like as a 15-year-old, forced to tend sheep with people you don't speak their language, you've been ripped out of your home, all your education, family, friends are gone, treated as property now, abused. There on those green hillsides in rain-soaked clothes, probably given up hope. When Patrick was out there tending those sheep, as terrible as that was, he says that he began to have a gradual, not a sudden, but a gradual spiritual awakening. That he tried really hard to remember the Christian stories of his youth. And he really began, he says, the first time to pray, to reach out to God in prayer. And he had this sense that God was real and that God loved him. Sometimes hardships can do that. Hardships can send us into despair, but they can also have us turn more to God for help and guidance. So then, at age 21, 6 long years as a slave in Ireland, he had the opportunity to escape. Now, the risks were really high because an escaped slave could be punished by death. And he didn't know the way, he didn't have anyone to help him, but he had this sense that God was nudging him. Particularly those stories in the Old Testament of how Moses led the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt. He had this sense that God was a God of salvation and freedom, and God was not going to forget him. He felt this nudge to go, and so he did. He escaped. And for 28 days, he went through the bogs and marshes of Ireland on the run. And finally, he made his way to a port. And he says that at the port, he actually felt the most at risk because he thought his tattered clothes and his foreign accent were going to give him away. But he went to the ship captain and said, could I, be aboard your ship and work? And the captain said yes, and off he went. And he found himself back at home. His family couldn't believe it. I mean, no one escaped Irish slave traders. And And what they saw was a different person, too. He'd been a, kind of spoiled 15-year-old, now was a taller 21-year-old who had a kind of spiritual center to him, and also had been somebody who'd suffered a kind of brutality that never left him. And at this point comes the biggest twist in our story about Patrick. You see, the Irish people had been so cruel to him, right? They'd kidnapped him, they'd taken him out of his home, taken away everything that he knew, forced him to be a slave. I think the natural impulse, the impulse for me, would be to stay as far away from those people as possible. Or maybe more, to want a little vengeance, right? They hurt me, I'm going to hurt them back. Patrick was different. He felt drawn to return to Ireland, not for vengeance, but to care for those people. He was ready to leave his wealthy villa to try to spread the message of faith to the people of Ireland. He especially had in mind the people that he had seen who were enslaved there. He knew that they needed hope and a new life, and he kept having these dreams, Patrick did. I'm supposed to go back there and make a difference, to help them build a better world, to help them know Jesus Christ. So, what a kind of message that is. Think about that. He's modeling something that's really practically living out that message Jesus gave in that gospel we heard today. To love your enemies. To actually forgive people who have hurt you. To go and then not just seek reconciliation, but he modeled wanting something that was better or even best for them, for those people who had wronged him so much. Boy, that's hard to do. But I think we can all see what a high moral calling that can be. And it's certainly in the model of what Jesus wants. And so Patrick, he started to get trained as a priest and then as a bishop. And those other English bishops couldn't understand. Why you're going to go back to Ireland? Why would you go to those pagans, those savage barbarians? Patrick said, because God cares for them. And so he was ordained, and he set off, and he crossed the channel and went into Ireland. And it was not easy. From the beginning, he had these Irish tribal leaders and these Druid priests who had it in for him, right? He's bringing this gospel message that's going to turn over their power dynamics. Christian faith can sometimes be very threatening to people in power. But the biggest threat that Patrick brought was his attitude towards slavery. And we have to realize that slavery was just an accepted part of society. This is the year 400, right? By everyone. Everyone just accepted that. Patrick has been called the first person in history to ever unequivocally oppose the institution of slavery. He preached against slavery. He knew it broke God's heart because he had experienced it. This also shows that just because a majority of people think a certain way, that doesn't make it right. It means that it's going to take some real insight and some compassion to find those places where people are hurting, and it takes real courage to stand against injustice, even though it's accepted by many people or even a majority of people. Slaves, women, the outcast were drawn to Patrick's gospel message. They had this sense that Patrick loved them and a sense that their Creator could love them too. And so Patrick's flock, it grew. And they had a sense that God was working through him to help build a more harmonious and just society. One of the things that St. Patrick inspired was the building of monasteries, particularly places for scholarship and learning. And these centers, these libraries, became such an important place for world knowledge to be. Over the centuries, that's a place that was preserved. And that knowledge is passed down to us, and one of the other great legacies of Patrick. No, Patrick was not Irish, but he saw the Irish people as his spiritual children. He opened himself to God's inspiration to return to that island that had wounded him. A humble, compassionate, learned person, a wonderful model for our Christian life.